All of our representatives are currently busy. Please stay on the line, and your call will be answered by the next available representative. The estimated hold time is currently less than 96 minutes.
People are used to press zero, give me a human, to try to get away from them as fast as possible.
The contact centers have to change their mindset.
If you're a BPO who's selling labor, that puts you in a weird position. That's furthest behind, honestly, is the analyst. And it's sort of, when you go look at the Gartner or Forrester reports of the last 6 months, they're literally wrong. And it's amazing.
As humans, for us, voice is the most empathetic mode of conversation.
That concept of Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 should disappear. What's at issue is, if you're a leading company and you want to create the best experience for customers, what do you invest in? Chat will completely go away. 90% of these interactions will in fact be handled by AI, and that's a good thing.
Think about the last time you phoned customer service. Stuck on hold, passed from agent to agent, frustrated. Now imagine instead getting someone or something on the line right away. Voice AI that sounds human, understands you, solves your issues faster. Sounds like sci-fi, right? Where's the reality? It's happening. The voice AI market was about $4 billion in 2024, and some analysts expect it to double in the next 12 months. I am Abhinandan Jain, and this is CEX Talks. Today we talk with Alex Levin, co-founder and CEO of Regal.ai, a company building voice agents that some say already rival humans. We'll pull apart the hype versus reality, show where we are right now, and explore where we are headed in the next 5 years. Let's dive in. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So Alex, before we start, you want to give us a background on your journey, because it's been quite amazing, as I've been following you running big contact centers at Handy and Angie to then founding Regal. What was that aha moment, that made you launch a voice AI company?
Sure. So I was not somebody who grew up in contact centers. I actually was a product manager and a marketer originally. And some founders hired me to a company called Handy, which is a new home services company. And one of the things they gave me was the contact center. I knew nothing about it. And I remember I worked 90 days straight, my first 90 days with the contact center, trying to understand what was going on, how it worked, all these things. And then as that grew, we eventually became part of Angie, which is the largest home services company in the world. And we had about a 3,000 person contact center. And, I stayed involved with that. And I'd say one of my big learnings was that customers, especially in our industry, wanted to talk with us. And, when things went wrong or when they wanted to change something, it was easiest for them just to pick up the phone and call. But at $10 an interaction, it was not always logical for us to answer that call. And it was actually quite hard because we had to always go find these tricky ways to convince a customer not to call us, from not so tricky like hiding the phone number to tricky like how do we make sure that if they have certain problems, they never end up talking to a human being, they end up in bot world or something. And I guess it got to the point where in the CX world, the whole conversation was about deflection, right? Moving people away from voice and bots and automation and all. And at some point I just thought we'd lost the train, right? We'd completely lost where we were going, because the whole point of CX isn't about bots. The whole point of CX is to actually help serve the customer better, create a loyal customer who's going to stay with you forever. And if they want voice, you got to figure out some way to give them voice. And so at that point, my co-founder and I really started looking into, at the time, how do we use software and technology to improve that experience on voice and bring down the cost? And one of the pieces of that was obviously the advent of LMs, that could be conversational. And it completely changed what we could do using AI agents instead of using a human agent. And so we left and started Regal really on this premise that using AI agents would allow two things. One, bringing down the cost, but two, actually creating a better customer experience, because it was good at many of the things humans were not good at. We could staff anytime. They would know everything. We'd only have to train them once. They would never leave somebody waiting on hold. Those are things that AI does actually very well. And I remember at the beginning, people telling us, are you crazy? Like, nobody wants to talk on the phone. Why are you starting a company that focuses on voice?
You actually raised two very interesting points. One, the contact centers have to change their mindset from, hey, do not call us, you're a cost line item for me, to actually saying, hey, we are here to help you. And how do you manage the cost is a separate issue. But first is, how do you resolve that issue with the customer is calling you for, right? And then, of course, and how the overall technology, shift has happened. So, Some of our viewers might not be very familiar with what is voice AI or LLM. So if you have to explain like voice AI at a dinner party with people, from non-technical background, how would you describe what's happening right now in that whole space?
Yeah, for sure. So start back where I was before, which is human beings, when they get on the phone, let's say it costs a brand $10 to support you. And even if brands would love to support you, that cost may not be worth it, to them. So for years, there's been investigation in technologies to allow you to do something on the phone at a lower cost. And largely, you've experienced those probably as a phone tree, press one for this, press two for that, or what is called in the industry natural language processing or intent detection, or an interactive voice agent, which is, tell me what you'd like. And you sort of say something and it tries to guess, what you'd like. And I'd say those are pretty underwhelming technologies. So if you go interview most people, they're not super happy with that set of technologies. And people are used to press zero, press zero, press zero, give me a human, to try to get away from them as fast as possible. So first point is the new technology is not that, right? Something has changed. And what's changed is the advent of LLMs that can understand language, generate language, reason like humans. And that makes all of this new stuff possible. So that's one. I'd say, what we'd hope is that actually, the next time you need something from a company, if you're talking with an AI agent, that's actually a great experience. And so you shouldn't really care what the technology benchmarks are and what the underlying pieces are. All you should care is that they're available, knowledgeable, helpful, pleasant, all the things that you would expect out of customer service on a call. But for those of you who are interested, it is interesting. What's happening under the hood is every time a customer talks, we're translating that into text, taking that text and getting back a response from an LLM that's helping us, decide what to say next. We're translating that back into an automated voice that now is a clone of a human voice. And then we're constantly repeating that process again and again. That actually is pretty well understood now. I'd say the hardest parts of doing this are, in order to make this a better experience, we have to have access to policies and knowledge bases. We have to have access to have the AI agent take actions or be agentic in the terminology of the day. Now it starts getting more complicated because we're no longer just trying to go back and forth, like a voice version of ChatGPT. We're actually trying to get something done in the conversation. And that's really what our sort of objective is with big brands, is to understand what it is customers are trying to achieve with them and translate that into this new technology so that the customer has a good experience.
Do you think the overall, I would say, the industry sentiment, which was there about 2 years back and mostly driven by, the research groups and analysts, that, hey, voice is going to be dead. I heard it a lot of times, and in many of the discussions, voice is dead. In the next 2 years, you'll see pretty much everything over chat and email. That's what will happen. Turn around, has it leveled back? Where, because as humans, us, voice is the most empathetic mode of conversation.
Yeah, talk about different groups. When we have dinners now with leaders from contact centers and sort of IT and marketing, and say, cool, what is the most important thing going on for you? They go, well, if I can tell you the truth, like, I'm going to be replacing human beings with AI. Like, they understand. I think that's one group. On the CEO level, I think there's a little bit of nervousness of how will this be interpreted? Because if this is interpreted as me firing people and people are losing their jobs, is that going to be seen as good or seen as bad? It's a little less clear. And on the consumer side, I think most consumers don't know what these generative AI experiences are because they're not very wide yet. So consumers mostly are saying, no, I don't like this experience. Well, what they've experienced is a historical phone tree, IVA, a very basic experience. Most of them have not experienced true generative agents. And so, it's hard for them to imagine what it could be. And so put it all together, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about the technology and about what's happening. But what we're starting to see is people are starting to get more comfortable with the idea that in 5 years or 10 years, whatever time frame you want, 90% of these interactions will in fact be handled by AI, and that's a good thing. Not only will it bring down costs for the business, but it will improve the ability to support customers, and the actual experience for customers will go up. And that's starting to become more okay to say out loud. You don't have to whisper it at like a dinner anymore. You can shout it from the rooftops. So that's a pretty exciting moment, I think, as that's transitioning. But
And that's where you boldly claimed, that please hold will disappear in one
Yeah,
of
the
its.
group that's furthest behind, honestly, is the analysts, and it's sort of they're starting to now realize how far behind they are because a lot of the analysts are still talking about the companies that have 100 or 200 million in revenue building IVAs and IVRs. They're not yet really versed in the newest pieces, and so it's hard for them to understand them. And I think they're starting to. They're really starting to dig in and learn about them. But when you go look at the Gartner or Forrester reports of the last 6 months, they're literally wrong, and it's amazing.
Yeah. And what is the impact? We are also seeing in the industry, there's a lot of mergers going on right now, across the CCAS vendors, one of the big voice AI companies, buying another, another company, which is more around agents, and things. So how do you see that ecosystem getting shaped up? What is the driving force? Because I remember, when you and I had first talked, you had some pretty bold statements, which you made, in terms of the future of CCAS and how CRM and how everything is going to collide. So talk to us a bit about that.
Yeah, I look at it a little bit like AOL. So I don't know if you remember your first dial-up, but I remember my first dial-up with AOL. And AOL is finally, actually, officially, I think this year, turning off dial-up. Everyone thought AOL was dead years ago, but it's taken all this time to really go away. So contact center software and agents are going to be like that. It's not going to go away quickly. It's going to be decades before it's completely gone. But that's sort of not what's at issue. What's at issue is, if you're a leading company and you want to create the best experience for customers, what do you invest in? And all those leading companies are investing in AI. And so, if you're selling contact center software for human agents or, anything to do with human agents, that puts you in a weird position. If you're a BPO who's selling labor, that puts you in a weird position. And so they're trying to figure out, if they want to continue to serve the most innovative companies, how are they going to do it? And largely that innovation isn't happening inside the contact center software company. It's not happening inside the BPO. They're either partnering with native agentic companies or they're acquiring them, to your point, with NICE buying Cognigy. So I think that's going to continue to be a mode. In business, always the famous debate is, right, who will reach sort of the right success first? Will the most innovative companies get there before the biggest companies with distribution get there, right? So sometimes the joke is like, who will win? Will a large company find innovation before an innovative company finds distribution, right?
Outside of Regal, who will you bet on? Who are you seeing in the market as, hey, these are one or two companies which really love, what they're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very honest with it, so I can talk about openly. It's not right now. It's not the CCAS companies. It's not the BPOs. They're not coming up with innovation. It's these generative companies, and within it, there's different levels. So the people who want to go truly build from scratch or building on top of LiveKit or PipeCat, people who are in mid-market want to play around with like a developer platform. The best ones are probably retail and VAPI. And people who want to go work with an enterprise vendor where there's SLAs and professional support and more customization. I'd say really it's us, Decagon, and Sierra. They're the three, and each of us have different strengths, which I can talk about. And what's interesting to me particularly, and I think hard for some people, is we haven't chosen to go raise as much money as Decagon or Sierra, largely because my experience is that that's not what dictates success. I think success is based off of making customers successful, not going and raising a bunch of money. But I think it does create a lot of noise in the industry and a lot of buzz for those companies, which is in the end bringing more interest into this area and isn't a bad thing.
So let's dive a little bit deeper into Regal. What is the Regal.ai strength today? What sets you apart from others, and what are you doing very actively to maintain that moat in your business?
So we have a theory that voice is going to be the majority of the future. So if I take this extreme view, it's that chat will completely go away, right? Chat was invented as the cheapest channel and maybe the worst channel from a customer experience perspective, but it was a necessary evil. Now that voice AI is actually cheaper than chat, why would you ever have this chat experience? Now, it'll take a while for people to wrap their minds around that, but I think chat will die. I think SMS and email continue to be important. Depending on the customer, they may be more important than phone actually. But we strongly believe in how important voice will be in the go forward model. And so we took a stance very early that we wanted to invest more in voice. So while we serve all the channels, we focus on voice, and that's where we've really built. And then within the market, we looked at both what we thought was happening and where our strengths were, and we decided to focus on the most enterprise customers, where like I said, it's more than just a product. We have a self-serve product, but then we also offer professional services, SLAs, customization that is required to work well in that market. And I think we have the right product for it. Obviously there's many other segments of the market that people have gone over, but that's kind of our world. So more voice, more enterprise. And I think what'll be interesting to watch is how much we and others are able to productize the experience of building an AI agent. If it becomes that, what's the example? In websites, years ago, right, you had to build your own website. And then you sort of had different website builders, but largely enterprises didn't use website builders. And now if you're a retailer, even if you're Walmart, you use Shopify. If the answer is that one day, even the largest enterprises will use a, self-serve product like developer tools that exist, we've chosen the wrong lane. Now, I think that's 15, 20 years out. There's plenty of time, but we've chosen the wrong lane. On the other hand, if it turns out that it's more like, marketing, where it's kind of a build with value proposition, and the largest companies do want a more complicated, more sophisticated email marketing tool like a Braze or a Salesforce Marketing Cloud, and they want to then be able to use that to build what they see as their custom version of marketing, well, then I think we're in the right lane and we'll be very successful over the next 15 years. And, time will tell.
As you look at this market, both from an enterprise perspective, of course, enterprises are a lot more complex. In all the deployments today and the use cases you've been working on, what are some of the areas where voice AI it should be a given, right? It shines very well. And then where are the areas which are still, you would yourself tell the customer, hey, let's not touch it because the technology is still getting refined, maybe after 3 months, maybe after 6 months. So if you can shed some light on that for our viewers to think about it, as they go on their own journey.
Yeah, a few thoughts to have. So first is, the benchmark should not be a technology benchmark. The benchmark should be a customer outcome. So if you're going into this saying, well, can we get the latency to sub the latency of humans? And it's the wrong way to get started. If you're coming in saying, can I match first contact resolution? Can I improve on CSAT? Then you're going to sort of, I think, enter with the right mindset. So that's one thing to start with. I think in terms of use cases, the ones that are easy, and honestly, any voice AI platform can handle for you, choose whatever you want, and you'll be very happy, is things like, hey, there's a reminder call that I need to make to somebody saying it's, their appointment is at 3 p.m. tomorrow. Or, somebody calls in and you need to do some basic FAQ type answers of 2 or 3 questions. Cool. Everyone can basically do that. Now, where it gets more complicated is as the amount of things you're being asked questions about grows, right? So the database of stuff or the knowledge base you're looking at gets really big. And also as the actions that the agent has to take get more complicated, or that there are actions like, hey, I need to update this database, or I need to get you a quote, or I need to do something and schedule it. That's harder. And then as the length of the call increases, particularly when I say length, I also mean usually the complexity, like there's multiple steps in the call. It starts pushing the limit of what's possible today within the technology. Now, it's not to say you can't do it. In fact, we do the most complicated stuff, even with like Medicare Advantage customers with 30-minute calls and very complicated actions, complicated whatever. So it can be handled, but it's much more complicated. So the only place I see really today where AI isn't playing a role is where it's a licensed job, meaning a human has to do it because a human is licensed. Anything that's unlicensed, AI can do. The exception I would say is where it starts getting into very heavy, multi-call, multi-stakeholder selling, like in B2B. I don't see it sort of yet performing at that level because honestly, it's hard for humans. I think, you should pick something which you can teach a human to do pretty easily. With, B2B enterprise sales, that's pretty hard for a human to do. I don't know if an AI is going to be able to do it quite yet, but anything that a human can do, it can do now. The basic use cases we tend to talk about are around support and IVR replacement, around sort of lead generation and basic qualification and a little bit sales, basic selling, and then around operational use cases like payments and collections and scheduling, things like that.
Questions. So what is that one biggest myth, about AI calls you would want to bust right now? Number one. Number two, there's of course a lot of debate around deepfakes in the same breath. What are the steps you are taking to address that concern which many of the customers might have?
Yeah, look, the biggest myth is that it's easy. Sure, there are easy use cases, yes, where anybody can handle it, no problem. But if you get into like a real interaction that is a little bit more complicated, There's only, I don't know, 50 people in the whole world who have any experience at any scale building these AI agents, using the technology to build AI agents. And they're at Sierra, Decagon, and Regal. They're not at the companies that, are trying to learn this technology. And so part of the reason people are choosing to work with us is that we have that experience. We've done over 300 million calls at this point, and we know how to use the 50 different settings that are required to actually get the agent to do the thing that you want. And that's, it may be easy enough for us, but it is not easy for somebody who's never done it before. So that's, I think, a big piece. Yeah, I'm trying to think of what else I'd point out to people. Yeah, I think the other mistake people make in this sometimes is there's a lot of people out there replacing IVRs with generative AI. Yes, it should be replaced, but when you replace an IVR with generative AI, it increases your cost because generative AI is more expensive. So I really point out to companies that by itself, that's going to be a really hard business case to be successful on. What you need to hopefully do is replace some of what the human agents are doing, because the generative AI is cheaper than the human agents. Altogether, hopefully bring your costs down and give customers a better experience. I believe generative AI is better than an IVR, but I usually push people away from only doing an IVR replacement.
So what you're saying is, it has to be a combination of a generative AI plus, humans, being replaced by AI. And then whatever humans are left, they're augmented by AI to be more productive. Hence your overall ROI increases.
Yeah, it's just, like I say, I try to make sure that anytime people are doing projects in this area, that it's a net cost reduction. That's all. I don't want to require somebody to go ask for incremental budget, because it violates kind of one of the core promises of this technology.
What about deepfakes and the concern around it?
So we went and, for instance, made AI agents that were clones of our venture capital investors. Cloned their voice, we took all of their writings, and then we sent it to their mothers. And some of the mothers goes, I love this. I can talk to my son anytime I want now, So I think that's nice for mothers. I do think to varying levels of success, it really does sound like them. Particularly one of them, we managed to get the voice and the tonality exactly right. And when people hear it, they're like, oh my God, that's him. So I think it is possible now to really get the voice and tonality and attitude and knowledge base right. So, one of our investors was joking, we should all come up with our own safe word now, right? So he went to his family and they had a family dinner and they said, okay, my safe word is whatever. So if you're talking with who you think is this investor and you're not sure it's really me, ask. And the only one who'll know the safe word is the real me. So that way they have a way of checking. And I think that's going to become more and more important. You can't assume that it's the person just because it sounds like they are.
I think that's a great advice for our viewers. Get to your dinner table today and get yourself a safe word for you and your families.
Yeah, it's going to happen sooner than later. I'm public, and then I'm out there talking on podcasts and on panels and things. My voice is out there. So we tell all our new employees, if you get a call from Alex and he's acting strange, maybe check before you go and do it. And so you do have to be, I think, a little bit more aware.
You talked about, how, every project needs to be looked at from a overall, hey, what is the ROI? What is the customer experience it's going to deliver? And from a consumer standpoint, so if I'm a consumer, I know, sometimes, for example, most of the consumers today hate chatbots. What can the consumers expect, from this technology and how this technology should be configured to drive adoption? What are some of the things you have seen, which really work?
Yeah, look, I'll give you a simple one. I was writing about it actually, I think this last weekend. I'm busy usually during the day and I have a list of things either I need to do or my wife wants me to do, or I can't do it online for some reason. But you know what? What are the hours of the phone lines for all these brands? Well, it's Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, which is not very helpful to me. And so, as a very basic thing, that concept of Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 should disappear, right? Once you've switched to AI agents, it doesn't matter where in the world the customer is or when the world the customer is, they should be able to access what they want immediately. And so that's a pretty basic concept that I sometimes skip over because I'm so used to it now. But it is one of the promises of this technology is that you should never be waiting on hold. You should never be sent into some endless phone tree. You should never be sort of told the business is closed. It should always be available. And so I think as a business, if you're not starting to think in that way, like you're missing out on opportunities.
And do you think it makes sense from a disclosure perspective, when you're talking to an AI agent, a voice AI agent, to say, okay, hey, this is Jack, who is your voice AI agent? Does that increase the adoption? What are your viewpoints on disclosures, upfront to build that trust?
So I'd say today, the government has not legislated this yet. And I'd say about half of our customers do disclose up front, half don't. But if a customer asks, they always are honest, obviously. Nobody's trying to be tricky. And there's interesting effects. When a customer knows it's AI, they're a little bit more honest, actually, than they are with humans because there's less judgment. So in a situation like a collections situation, we find that AI agents are better at collections than human, for instance, or there's other sort of odd effects like that. What do I think is right? I think if you do sort of a thought experiment, you say, where does this eventually go? Think about, I don't know if you're a chess player, but think about a situation where you're playing chess online and you think you're playing against a beginner, but it turns out it's a grandmaster. Well, you might be pretty annoyed afterwards when you get whooped, right? Or, imagine you're at a casino if you're a gambler and, you think you're playing against the normal group of beginners, but it turns out one of the guys won the World Series and you're getting your money taken. You're probably pretty pissed. So look, in a basic sense, I don't think it is required today because the AI agents aren't that good yet. They're not like, there's no huge advantage they have over you. But in a situation where in this thought experiment, where one day they are at a huge advantage to the human, I want to know just so that I don't get taken, right? Because they're going to be able to outthink me, out-negotiate me, out-whatever me all day long. And that, I want to know that I'm walking into that situation. So I'm not suggesting that, that'll happen immediately, but I think it could get to that point. So I think it won't be about knowing it's an AI agent to, so that, I can say, I want press 0, I want a human. I think it's knowing so that the level of interaction. The other thing that I think is going to happen is as consumers get more used to the technology, I'll know what the different levels of quality are. And I'm going to expect to be talking to, whatever the Google's version of the technology or Anthropic's, whatever 88th version of the technology. So if I call a company and they're on Google 2, I'm going to be pissed. And so what actually maybe the disclosure is not just if it's an AI agent, but what is the underlying model that's running so that I, as a consumer, know, right? If it's Alexa, I know I need to say, hey, Alexa, play music. And that's all it can do. If it's Google 2, maybe I can say, and answer some questions. And if it's OpenAI's 100th model, maybe I can talk to it like it's my best friend and I know it does anything that I need. So I think disclosing, there's going to be an interesting concept of bring your own model or disclosing the model that I think will start happening.
But for all the voice AI enthusiasts, who are trying to build, a company, in voice AI, what would be your dream stack recommendation as the technology which stands today?
Yeah, I think today still it's mostly a chained stack, meaning you're choosing a speech to text provider, an LLM, a text speech provider, and there's a couple other major tools you need in there. And then, the software is really being building workflow software around how do you build AI agents, how do you improve them, how do you include them in the right place in a call, how do you then have the agent take actions, have memory, things like that. So I think, there's a lot of custom work, but in terms of the tools, you won't be very surprised. For speech to text, I think the best right now are probably Assembly and DeepGram. There's a few others that I really like, but those are probably the best. For LLMs, it's probably, OpenAI, Gemini, which is Google's, and Anthropic Claude. At least in the voice world, those are the three best. And then for text to speech, you probably have OpenAI, 11 Labs, Cartesia, Rhyme is a new one that's quite good. There's a couple more that are about to come out that are quite good. But our job is not to necessarily pick one, right? Our job is to make sure that all the best ones are available on the platform so the customer can A/B test and see what they want. One of the things we actually do is we'll clone voices of our own from professional voice actors and make them available across all the platforms so that you can have the same voice and choose the platform based on its abilities. Like it might be a little bit better at latency or a little better at word pronunciation or a little better at something else. But it's this right now, people are largely choosing the platform basically on the sound of a professional voice actor. And that's silly because we can put the same voice actor on all the platforms. So really you should be choosing on the other things it does well.
Okay. I know earlier you mentioned, today, yes, humans are doing licensed agent works. Do you see a future coming, when voice agents will be licensed?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think today the agents could pass the test. That's not the question. The question is, why are there these licenses? Is it because there was a union that, wanted to protect jobs? Well, in that case, it's gonna be pretty hard for us to displace that union. But if it was just because they wanted to make sure consumers were protected and there was somebody on the other end who had certain training, I don't think it's very hard leap to believe that AI should be able to pass that test. And if they pass that test, get the license. There would be change in the actual law around it, but I don't think that's hard to believe at all.
And I know with the FCC rules now treating AI voice as pre-recorded from an outbound perspective, does that change anything from your compliance blueprint? Or?
No, we sort of have always been very involved in the outbound world and sort of what's going on there. I'd say the one advice I give people is, even though legally today you don't need the TCPA permission to do an outbound call with this AI voice, it will eventually come into being law. And so you should change your consent to instead of saying, I give you permission to text message and call me, it should say I give you permission to text message and call me, including from a pre-recorded or artificial voice, just so that in the future you'll be able to do it when that law comes into place. But that's not really that complicated. I think the more tricky thing now is with AI agents, you can do infinite number of calls. And so we work with customers to understand that it is not in their benefit to do infinite calls. Like, that's not the goal. They should really still be limited to think about what is the best customer experience. And so, there are a few bad actors in the world, sure, but largely brands understand that, and they're not looking to use AI agents just to call a million times.
And, when you talk about customers, is there any customer experience where the outcome of what actually got achieved really surprised you, even you were not expecting that kind of performance?
Yeah, I'd say the moments that really were surprising to me, the first time we were able to get a voice AI agent to the point where I go, that was good enough. And you have to have that experience on your own before I think you can believe this is really a thing. So we put all these phone numbers on our website everywhere so that people will call them and see that it is finally good enough. So that, I think, was one aha moment. In terms of specific ones, I'd say the learning around collections was a funny one, that actually people are more honest with the AI agent than the human. It's not crazy, it's kind of believable, but that's a bit weird that you start seeing that the goal isn't mirroring human performance. The goal is using this new technology to achieve an outcome that's as good as possible. I'd say the other one that's interesting is that people talk about a lot, so this is not an uncommon thing to talk about, is that people say thank you to AI agents. They're not treating them like a machine. They're not going to you don't go to the soda machine, go boop, 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 thank you. You just put in your money, you get the soda out and you walk away. But with AI agents, when they do something, you say, please, can you help me with this? You say thank you at the end. People are I don't know if it's just that they're anthropomorphizing them, or they're thankful, or they're treating them that way, but it is different than a machine in some way. That's material. Yeah. And maybe it's just our mental model of it is it feels humans. And so we treat it as if it's human. But that is, I think, a bit surprising to people. And there are some studies that show that if you say please and thank you, the results are better. So keep saying please and thank you.
Is there a role for human agents? What will they do?
Well, let's start with the way the industry works. So let's say there's 16 million seats, 40% churn a year, meaning 40% of those people leave and say, forget this. I'm going to go do so. So it's not like it's a job that people love to start with. I think that job will, reduce in the number of heads in that specific industry. The better people who are creative and who are thinking about how to improve things will get six-figure jobs, so much higher paying jobs, training AI, iterating on AI, building new AI agents, doing all kinds of reporting. I think there are all kinds of roles that will be generated just in that industry. But then, I don't really know what new roles will be created. The example I often give is in retail. As we shifted online, millions of in-person retail jobs were eliminated. And the new job that was created was in a warehouse because we're starting to do shipping. And so net, we didn't actually see a massive reduction in job. We didn't see an explosion of unemployment. And I think in every iteration of new technology, a similar thing has happened where there was the washing machine, there was the computer, there was the phone, there was the internet. Each time it was, oh no, this is going to destroy everything because it's going to produce so much more efficiency. Well, it didn't. It just created a new job. So I don't know what those brand new careers are, but I'm not at all scared about whether my kids will have jobs. They will definitely have all kinds of new job opportunities because of the efficiencies brought about by AI.
Alex, this has been a great conversation. So, which brings us to our last round, which is a lightning round. And you only get maybe 10 seconds to think about it. So, one thing you'd love to banish forever from contact centers.
Chatbots. Get rid of web chat forever.
What's your favorite use of AI outside Regal?
I use sort of ChatGPT a lot to help me with writing. I find it's helpful, like in a first draft, or if I'm iterating on something, like that's quite helpful. And my kids actually have started talking with some of the AI agents we build now, so that's fun when they like start talking with the AI. They particularly get confused. Kids particularly get confused when it's somebody they know. Like we'll clone somebody's voice that they know, and they'll be like, "Wait, was that like this person or not?" And so like that's sort of fun.
So, do you see a future, where it's my voice agent, talking to the company's voice agent and them negotiating things? It's already happening, right?
Yeah, it's already happening. I have friends just for fun projects. I haven't seen anybody do this really at big scale yet, but I have friends who've built little agents to do like, hey, order a pizza for me or do this other thing for me, where it's going on and doing things on their behalf. And yeah, I think that'll happen. Historically, there was a job that was sort of I call it the human API in a lot of industries. So in logistics, there's a lot of human API, for instance, of people sort of talking to other people to try to figure out where the packages are, because it's such a fragmented industry. And it was very hard to turn that into APIs because you would have to integrate with a million different companies, and there's constantly new ones generating every year. Similar in home services. It was a very fragmented industry, and there's a lot of human API type stuff. In a world of of AI agents, maybe you don't need the human API anymore. So I think the ability for AI to start playing that role in logistics or playing that role in sort of local home services in these highly fragmented industries is very exciting.
One last question. One piece of advice, to a 25-year-old who's trying to build their next startup, in the voice AI or overall AI ecosystem, in the CX space.
Yeah, I think the advice you were probably given when you started around, deflecting as much as possible is probably wrong. And so just like open your mind a little bit to what your real goals are, which are, at a certain cost. So let's say you have a certain amount of money you can spend driving the highest CSAT and the most loyalty possible, right? That's ultimately your goal, not deflection. And so I think being aware of that is important. And, I think every young person now, with the advice I give them is like, are you testing all these new tools? I don't think they have to use them every day, but they should be testing them and have an opinion about them. If you're going to be in a marketing career and you haven't tried the 5 new marketing AI tools, well, what are you doing? You coming here applying for a job and you haven't tried and I've tried the new ones and you haven't, like that's a weird situation. If you're in that, if you want to be in the CX industry, you don't have to be an expert, but go develop an opinion about some of these tools that are out there so that you can talk in an educated way about them.
Thank you, Alex. This has been great. Thank you for sharing your time with us and our audience. Audiences, Regal.ai is doing some great work. You can check out their website. Do follow Alex, on LinkedIn. He always has a great viewpoint on a lot of different things which are going in this space. Alex, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.